Today, we'll give an overview of what you can use AI for as a software developer. So the AI landscape has been changing rapidly. A new tool seems to come out weekly, and we constantly hear about new breakthroughs. So as a software developer, it's hard to keep up with all the latest tools, changes, and even harder to figure out what out of all this AI stuff is relevant to your day-to-day work. Many tech leaders I've heard are claiming that AI is helping them achieve greater engineering velocity. It's improving the quality of their code, enhancing engineering experience, just to name a few. But how can you today leverage AI to improve your work as a software engineer? And most importantly, what are the most effective ways to use AI right now? So we followed AI since the early 2000s. Since Jeff Hawking's book on intelligence was published, and definitely AI has come a long way since then. And definitely today, most software engineers can benefit from some AI. So in this video, we'll cover some of the top use cases for software engineers. And this is generally going to be an overview. We're not going to dive into too many details, although we'll show some examples. So the four use cases we're going to cover is code completion, code generation, summarizing or explaining code, and agentic coding. Of course, there's some other use cases that may be useful for some software developers, maybe image generation or some other ones. But in this video, we'll just focus on the four we mentioned. All right, so the first one is code completion. And we're basically talking about the original GitHub Copilot, which popularized code completion. It's a tool that can be integrated in your IDE and can perform multi-line code completions. And these, the Copilot and similar tools have become extremely popular with software developers, and we've been using one daily for quite a while. And we found the code completions extremely helpful, even though occasionally it generates function signatures and some other code that's not quite right. So let's take a look at an example. Oops. Let me jump back to where I was. Okay, so one thing to know about code completion is it will generally always give you an example based on the context surrounding the code. It'll give you an example code completion like this one. Now, if you don't like it, you can override it. Say, I want to do something with policies here. So I say policy management. Okay, that's not bad. I press enter, and then it gives me another example. And as you can see, I can only see one, but it's actually, if I want to, I can actually open completions and I can see options of multi-line completions. I don't usually use these options. Usually I just do one line at a time. It seems to work. But I could, accept this solution and it'll fill out multiple lines, what it thinks needs to happen for this interface, like what methods does this interface need to implement. Okay, so that's the basics of code completions. And we've had something like this before, like usually your IDE would just give you like the function name based on the first letter, etc. But this is just more of that. It's very useful for some boilerplate, especially occasionally comments. And we've used it for documentation, such as writing a user guide for new feature. If you need, it can also autocomplete text. However, you have to be aware that some search engine may be able to detect AI content, right, in your documentation and reduce your search rankings. All right, so code completion, pretty good. Basically, most people should be using it. Let's talk about code generation. So we're going to talk about kind of a more specific case of code generation, which is similar to code completion, but the desired result is basically a complete function or a code block. So typically engineers would use a chat interface such as ChatGPT and provide it a description of the desired function. And it's good to provide a detailed description along with inputs and outputs to get the best result. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to ChatGPT and we'll ask it to write a function. So write a Golang function that takes path.url, makes a GET request to that URL, parses the JSON response, and returns a struct with the attributes and data fields that it got from the response. Nothing too complicated, but nothing that you can just Google for, right? There has to be some generation that happens here. Let's go ahead and do that. And while it's thinking, and this is one of the issues with AI, sometimes it can be quite slow. While it's thinking, and we'll come back to this later, we'll explore another tool. So some languages such as Go, let's take a look at this. Okay. Package main, yes, it created a struct. This is nice, not bad. Like, it doesn't know what type it needs to be, but that's fine. So, we can quickly look at this. It does an HTTP GET, that's fine. Returns an error, parses into this struct. It seems reasonable. And this usage example is commented out, so that's a little strange, but okay. There have been, people are starting to make tools that are language specific, right? So for example, there's a Go specific tool called SketchDev. It's under development, so it's pretty raw. So we can try to do the same here. We can basically take our prompt that we wrote here and type it into here. And this is not only generate a function, it'll let you edit it, and it looks like it's also generating tests for it. So, this is more language specific and definitely kind of more useful than just a plain one, because you can also, it's like a playground, so you can also run the code here. So, pretty nice experience. And I think that's where, it's an example of where some of these tools are headed. All right, so we talked about code generation. Next thing, let me think, did I miss anything? Just some general comments, right? So with code generation, previously you would accomplish this by searching Google or Stack Overflow for similar code snippets. And to a certain degree, you can still do that, right? One thing I mentioned is it does take a little while for the code to be generated, and then you have to read it. So, you still need to take some time. It still takes some time to get that code. Perhaps if you're like really fast at Googling and reading and typing, you can kind of accomplish the same thing in a similar amount of time. But that said, if you're not familiar with the code or functionality, then definitely it is useful to use an AI to do this type of code generation. All right, so next one is summarizing or explaining code. It's kind of a broader topic. Basically, the problem that often engineers have is they have a large code base, or maybe a code base they're not familiar with, or maybe it's even a library that they need to use that doesn't have much documentation. And they need to kind of understand the code written by other engineers. Some of them they can't reach, they have left the company, etc. Maybe you need to find a specific piece of code in the code base. So AI can help with this by reading the code base and kind of adding it to its context. So this is just throw out some terms. This is an example of retrieval augmented generation, RAG, where AI combines its general model with some specific context of the code base. And if the code base is large, obviously it cannot send the whole code base to ChatGPT to get a response. It needs to do some pre-processing itself, right? So oftentimes it makes an index, it does its own kind of deterministic search to kind of a semantic search, and then sends those parts to the AI to do additional processing. Okay, so let's give an example. So we're going to be using a tool called Cursor, a AI code editor. It is popular. A lot of people are using it. It does have a free tier, but it also has a paid tier. It is built on top of VS Code. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I do have our code base loaded here. So you can toggle this AI pane, right? And here's where we can, ask it questions, ask it to do stuff. And the thing that we want is we want our code base to be indexed. So if we jump into the settings, features, and here we have code base indexing enabled and completed. So we want to ask a question about our own code bases. So this is a code base for our project. So I'm going to ask it a very specific question. In which Go files is macOS disk encryption code located? And I'm gonna submit it for our code base. So you can do it just a general question, or you can specify that that this is a question specifically for the code base down here. All right, so it looks like it pulled up some files. And then in addition to pulling up those files, it is looking at the top files and kind of trying to extract the specific code of those files and trying to figure out what those files do. So in my opinion, this is extremely useful for kind of engineers that are not familiar with the code base or just have some questions about specific parts of the code. Instead of immediately going to a team member or team chat and asking about it, they could ask Cursor first, and perhaps they would, at the very least, they will learn something, right? So this seems like a pretty good use case. All right, so let's move on to the next part, which is agentic coding, right? And it is perhaps the most kind of advanced, the most cutting edge feature of AI right now. So when we talk about agentic coding, we're referring to using an AI agent to do tasks such as write code, including creating moving files, write and run tests, including even browser UI tests, clicking the mouse all over the place, writing and reading and following documentation. The documentation could contain instructions, do terminal operations such as git commits, installing applications, even SSHing to other servers and doing work there, things like that. So the top agentic coding tools are, first one is RuCode. So it is open source. It is a VS Code extension. The other one that this RuCode has forked form is Klein. Klein is another agent. It is also open source. It is also a VS Code extension. And then also the aforementioned Cursor, right? It also has some agent. If I click on feature, it also has some agent capabilities. So this area in agents is quite hot right now. So GitHub Copilot has also recently announced the agent mode. So Copilot is going to be getting an agent mode, and it's available as preview. And so far, a lot of this stuff has been VS Code. So VS Code is kind of on the cutting edge as far as tools are concerned. JetBrains, which is the IDE that we often use, has also announced its own agent that's only available in the early access program as of right now. A general comment about agents. So they are definitely still in their very early stages. They're changing rapidly, and they definitely require a lot of handholding. So it's quite reasonable to wait another 6 to 12 months before revisiting them to see kind of how they fall out. All right, so let's talk about kind of AI coding agent workflows. So going through a workflow can be quite time consuming, so we'll try to show you some examples here. But basically, the important thing to know about AI agents is that documentation, is you need some documentation for them in terms of like a README file or an implementation plan. So basically, when you start creating something, you want to give some context to the AI agent. The context, the documentation could be like an API specifications. It could be like a secrets file. And you also want to have a plan. And the plan, you can generate the plan using another AI, such as ChatGPT. So you can go to ChatGPT to create an implementation plan for your AI agent. In fact, why don't we go ahead and do an example while it's running. So let's go back. Let's go back here. Let's do a new chat. And I'm not going to type everything out. It's going to take a while. So I'm going to copy and paste something we did earlier. Maybe I want to modify it a little bit. So let me make this bigger. We want to create. So this is basically a real thing that we need for our work. So let's see. We want to create a mock Google Android Management API server. So basically, Google has Android Management API. So we want to create a mock one for testing. We want to written in Golang. It's going to interact with our MDM solution during testing. It should hold state. It needs a pub/sub webhook. They'll receive push notifications. And we actually specifically say that this is a plan for another AI agent. So let's go ahead and kick this off. And while that's running, let's kind of talk more about planning. Okay, so we're going to create this plan. Then we want the AI agent to read the plan, update it, and create a, let's say, a more detailed implementation plan. Sometimes if it's like a big enough project, we may want to break it up into several parts. And then when we get started, we tell the AI agents to initialize a Git repo, create a project structure, and then start implementing the steps, the plan. And for each step of the plan, we want AI agent to create tests. And then we want to kind of checkpoint once in a while. We want the AI agent to update the documentation and commit all the outstanding changes. So basically, it's kind of a cycle. All right, we want to stop at some point, commit, so that way if the agent in the next part goes off the rails, breaks stuff, we can also kind of roll back and kind of try again. Of course, as with any prompts, we want to be as precise with our inputs. So we have a picture here. Let's go ahead. That's just too. Okay. Zoom in here. All right. So this is kind of a basic idea. Basic idea here. Let me draw on the screen. Okay. So you see, it's kind of a cycle, right? Originally, we create the documentation and we come in here. We basically ask it to add a feature or whatever the next part in the implementation is. Then we really need to add tests, right? Because we don't want to be going to manual QA. We could without tests, but you know, the proper software development pipeline is to add tests. Of course, we run them, fix them if needed. Then the green part is like manual QA. So then we actually need to try this ourselves. Try the code that AI wrote, give it feedback if needed to fix it. Might require some manual fixes. And then once we're done with the implementation, kind of we ask it to update its documentation, update its README, update its implementation plan, any other things. And then we commit the changes. And at this point, it's almost like an iteration. It's almost like a story. It's like we're done here. And then we can pause, we can go home, and then we can come back, maybe start a new session with the AI agent, tell it to read all the documentation, and then kind of go through this cycle again. All right, let's see what we want to say. Definitely, this is not trivial, right? This is not for everyone because you do need to kind of learn how your AI agent behaves, specific features of AI agents. Oftentimes, there's features of AI agent to kind of improve context, Let me think. I'm looking at root code. I thought there was something here. All right. Anyway, there's ways to guide the agent, but once the implementation is good enough, it is possible to simply transition into kind of manual maintenance mode, right? Perhaps this is good for getting 80% there, to getting the structure in place, and then you transition to fully manual mode where you've kind of finished the fine-tuning yourself. All right, so let's jump into, well, let me show you some of the agent-specific context stuff that I'm talking about. All right, I pulled up the root code documentation. So, things like context mentions, being able to do these add symbols, what it can do, enhance prompts. Now, there's a lot of things about the agent that you can improve your experience. So really, for advanced usage cases, you need to know what all the agent is capable of. So let's go jump in and actually try to do some stuff. But before we do that, we did ask ChatGPT-01 to create a plan. So it did create a plan. It's not bad. Project structure, core data and state management, kind of overview, endpoints, mock hook, webhook. Okay, high level plan. But the example we want to show is like where we are in the middle of the project. So this is kind of some AI work has been already done, and we're using root code here. But we open here root code and start typing down here. Let me make this bigger. Let's see. So this has all been generated by AI, right? Largely. Some of the stuff we provided, like this discovery JSON that we got from Google, and then we asked the AI agent to create this README. It's got project structure, current status, some API documentation, but I think we have a separate API doc as well. We have an API doc, we have an implementation plan. So this is kind of what it's working on. It puts check boxes by what it's finished. One thing that it hasn't been doing is actually creating some tests. So we're gonna see if we can ask it to write some tests. So we see it's completed this. So maybe we need to create some tests for data models and storage. All right, so we're gonna create a new chat. So first thing we're gonna tell it is to read the existing documentation. So we're gonna tell it read readme.md implementation plan.md and tell me what the next step is for this project. By the way, before I launch this, just some setup. So we go into settings and we are using Anthropic. We're using Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and we have an API key here. There's also auto-proof settings. So if you don't set auto-proof settings, then you need to, it keeps asking you whether it can modify files and such. And sometimes you don't want it to set, so there's a global kind of auto-proof settings here. Oftentimes we use this to kind of stop it from continuing. But let's go ahead and let's leave it unchecked for now. So it'll prompt us for every action it's going to take. Wants to read this file, that makes sense. Wants to read this file, makes sense. I think it should tell us what it's done. Implement the testing infrastructure. That I agree with that. Starting with testing framework. Okay, not quite correct, right? It's still got these check marks not set, but I do agree that we want to get to testing. So it gives you this information. So what do we didn't want to do? We wanted to, then we just say, yes, please proceed with implementing the testing infrastructure. Let's go ahead. I tell it, and we're gonna let it run. And you see it is modifying code. This is a little bit of a trick, right? It's basically like a progress bar. It's visually telling you that something's happening, mostly to hide the fact that it's really slow, right? Some people have argued that you can be effectively project managing multiple agents that are doing the work. But in reality, I'm a little bit skeptical. I have a hard time switching between tasks. So trying to switch from managing one agent doing one task, one feature, to another agent doing another feature, I feel like that's going to be kind of difficult. And you see how much code it's generating. So the challenge here is going to be kind of reviewing this code and making sure things are reasonable. All right, so let's go ahead and stop it just for example. So does some things like that. I'm going to unclick auto approve so it stops, so that I can show you the git command. So it is generating code, and then I can ask it to run those tests. If those fail, I can ask it to fix those tests. So there's a lot of, you can get into like a long session with your AI agent. You can spend a whole day, working with your AI agent. So I'm going to tell it, just for example purposes, commit your changes. I don't have auto approve checked, but you could. So it'll tell me that it's going to execute git add. So I'll tell it to run the command. I think it's going to git commit next. Git commit, I see it has a message to run command. Tells me to approve. There we go. So you have an example of it running the command. And it actually then proceeds to kind of the next step of this plan. I'm going to go ahead and run it while I talk about some issues. All right, so one issue I already mentioned is they are slow. The other issue is they do make mistakes. Obviously, we've known about this, but this is something maybe you expect to happen. So AI agents make mistakes and you have to review their code. However, like I mentioned, I think a good use case is kind of this, the structure. You create kind of a structure of a new project. You have something to base your work on. So it kind of saves you that boilerplate. All right, so that's it for today. So basically today we talked about major ways to use AI as a developer. Code completion, in our opinion, definitely should be using something like a multi-line code completion tool. Code generation, definitely useful in some cases. Summarizing or explaining code, definitely useful, especially for a use case where you ask your AI friend before you go ahead and ask another developer. And agentic code, still in its early stages, it does seem to do a lot of work. Quality is debatable, but there's definitely been examples, and we've seen AI tools be able to create kind of like simple web apps that are functional. So they're definitely useful, but you do have to kind of handhold it and kind of know a lot about your AI agent. So maybe not something you jump into and expect to be productive in. It's definitely something that's still evolving, and it may be worthwhile to wait another 6 to 12 months before jumping into agentic coding. All right, that's it.